If you've ever listened to any of my podcasts before, you have seen our guest then, because he has been around for quite some time. And every time I get the chance, I will talk to him and ask him. He is quite far and away my favorite podcast lawyer. In fact, he is the podcast lawyer. We are chatting with Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. You can learn more about him at gordonfiremark.com, checking out his Easy Legal for Podcasters course, giving you all the things you need in order to protect your podcast, to protect your brand. And he's also got podcastlawforms.com, a great place for legal templates to help you get your stuff underway. Gordon, thank you for joining me, and great to see you again, sir.
Great to see you, Matthew. It's always a pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
So, of course, again, I've heard this, but for those who've never heard before, tell us, how did you get your start into podcasting? Not just on the law side, but generally, like, when did you first pick up the microphone?
I got involved in theater audio as a very young age. I got hooked into the theater world when I was like 6 years old, kindergartner. And by the time I was in junior high, I was running the lights and sound at the school variety shows and things like that. Did that all through high school and into college as a professional sound engineer in live theater environments. And it was only after college, when I shifted into radio, TV, and film as my major, that I thought about going to law school. And so this has been with me for a really long time. And then the podcasting thing came about when I started my own practice, and I was looking for ways to market. Pretty much as soon as podcasting became a thing, I geeked out on
it. So, all right. So you've been doing, podcast since like 2009, 2010-ish?
I was first asked as a guest on some shows in about 2006, I think it was. And when that guy, who we ended up doing a show together for about a year, and then eventually his boss made him stop because he was moonlighting, according to the boss. And so by that time I was hooked, and I decided I would go out and find a co-host and get started. And then my wife had the baby. I was there for the fun part, but so that, hung things up for a few months. But yeah, it was mid 2009 when we launched. That's 16 years ago now.
So at the time, you were thinking about how to market your, well, it was ostensibly entertainment law firm, but then you decided, well, there's a lot going on in the podcasting world. Maybe I should have a little bit more of a core focus in this space in particular.
Well, I still practice a broad base of entertainment law. It just happens that podcasters are they're my people. So I like to work with them, and I've targeted a lot of my marketing in that direction. The fact of it is, the show, that original show from 16 years ago, still going strong. It's a monthly entertainment law roundup kind of a show we do, called Entertainment Law Update, real original name. And we've been doing it consistently on a monthly basis since 2009. So we're recording 177th episode next week, or later this week, actually. So
wow, congratulations.
Yeah, feels pretty good.
So as someone who's been in this space for quite some time, have seen podcasters from all levels, right? Just starting out to veterans who have been around for, I guess I can now say, decades. What are some of the most common legal stumbles that podcasters are making or are bound to make if they're not putting too much thought into this process?
Well, the first thing is that thing you just said, not putting too much thought into this, or waiting too long to start getting themselves organized from a legal standpoint. But from there, it's just not taking it seriously as a kind of a business thing. If you're podcasting as the business, then you need to think about setting it up as a business with the corporation or an LLC or something like that, and having good contracts and those kinds of things in place, especially if you're working with a co-host or something like that. Having what I call a podcast prenup kind of articulates the relationship and addresses not only what happens when things are going well, but also what if it doesn't. How do we go our separate ways in a way that everybody's comfortable with, and so that prenup becomes a co-host agreement or a collaboration agreement or joint venture, whatever, can take different forms. The other areas, of course, are intellectual property. You neglect copyright law at your peril, both as a creator, where you own the copyrights, and if you don't do what you can to protect them, you may find others using your content. But also when you use people's music or clips in your show, you better know the rules and do it right, or you're going to have pushback there. And I'd say the most important legal thing to do for most podcasters is look at your title, make sure it's a distinctive brand name that you can protect with a trademark. And registering a trademark is an important step in making sure you don't end up at one of the 12 shows with the same title in the marketplace.
Or worst case, you are copying somebody who already has that trademark. You've launched a show and now you got to go back and redo a bunch of stuff or undo a bunch of things.
Yeah, do a search before you choose your title if you can, so that you know you're not stepping on somebody's toes.
How do you know if when you search for a name, whether or not that name is protected versus just being common or popular?
Well, what can be protected under the law is distinctive. So it has to reach a certain threshold of distinctiveness. So if I call my show the basket weaving podcast, then there can be 12 basket weaving podcasts and nobody's going to have a claim because it's purely descriptive of what you get. Now, over time, I mentioned my own show, Entertainment Law Update. I've been doing it for 16 years. It has acquired some distinctiveness, and in the sense that there's a secondary meaning. When people go looking for my show, they know they're looking for my show, Entertainment Law Update. So that is now protectable and registrable as a trademark. But how do you know? Well, first of all, it doesn't matter whether it's registered or not. If you're not the first in the marketplace with that title, think about choosing a different title. Don't be following in other people's footsteps with your title, because that leads to confusion, and that's what trademark law is really about protecting against.
At what point does it makes sense. You're a business, right? You're a brand. There's a lot more things that you have to think about and protect. And, you've got clients and sponsors and all that. But if I'm just average Joe, average Jane, thinking about starting up a podcast, how much do I really have to worry about this?
Well, I would say there's different kinds of podcasters. There's average Joe or Jane doing a podcast as sort of a hobby, a side thing that they're just doing for the fun of it. And, they want to maybe have a little impact and influence, but is it really a business? Probably not. They don't need to necessarily worry too much, certainly not about the business structure, the LLC or the corporation. The trademark stuff, I think you still don't want someone else coming along and using the same name. That's going to be, it's going to dilute the value of what you build over time. So that I think is still pretty important. Then there are those who are doing it as a business, and they need to think very hard about this, about protecting what they're building structurally in terms of ownership, as well as the title and things like that, and having really good, strong contracts with the folks that they do business with. And then there's the third group who are podcasting as an adjunct or as a branch of their business, oftentimes a marketing arm for the business. Let's say you run a law practice and you want to attract more folks to your practice. You hold yourself out, put yourself out there as an expert. Maybe they don't need the LLC, but they still need to protect the brand and think about not saying the wrong thing, hurting someone's reputation, defamation kinds of things, or infringing on copyright. So I think everybody needs to be mindful of you not using content they don't own. I guess that's probably the most common complaint I see.
Yeah, and that's always one of the common questions that you see in a lot of support groups and support chats around podcasting. Can I use this song? Can I use this music? And I think ever since I met you, my test for that has been very simple. Do you own it? Nope. Then no. Right? Like it's just that simple. So for those who are really, this is more serious, they've got plans for monetization, for building a brand off of it, for making a ton of money off of it, or it's building upon an existing brand which has other assets and things that are worth protecting. You have the podcasters, easy legal for podcasters. What is that all about? What is that system like? What will people expect to get if they sign up for this program?
Well, so when I started practicing as a podcast lawyer specifically, I realized that I was doing these things for folks who could afford and wanted to hire lawyers to do these things, forming the LLC or the corporation, doing the trademarks, the copyrights, the contracts, getting it all squared away for them, the done for you kind of a model. And then I realized there's a lot of folks who want to get this stuff done or need to get this stuff done, but don't have the resources or the inclination to hire me to do it for them. So I wanted to create something that was a little more accessible and would allow them to do it themselves with guidance and instruction and forms and templates from me. So the Easy Legal for Podcasters program is a 4-part course that teaches these things, along with literally step-by-step how-to instructional videos on how to form that LLC, how to register that trademark, that copyright, what to put in where in the contract. And we give you all the contracts and templates and things that you need to get your business up and running as smoothly and quickly as possible. So it is what it says, Easy Legal for Podcasters.
And it is, in fact, just that. Now, again, you're not someone, now we're talking to someone, again, back to that average Joe, average Jane. You have these podcast law forms. What are some of the common ones that someone who's hearing this is like, I don't think I need all that, but there's definitely probably a few things that are probably helpful. What are some of those real helpful forms and resources that law forms would be good for that, just starting out podcaster or that indie podcaster?
Well, I think that podcast prenup is definitely one. If you're starting a show with other people, you want to establish the nature of that relationship. And it's fundamentally a partnership agreement of some sort, but it outlines the specifics of who's responsible for doing what, those kinds of things. If you are working with guests, I offer a free guest release agreement that is essentially getting written consent for the recording and the editing and the publication of the episode, without which you may find yourself with a guest who later comes back and says, I don't like that, take it down. And you're kind of in a rock and a hard place situation, especially if you have sponsors that are paying to have that episode up. Now you've got an issue there. So obviously you don't want to alienate good friends who are guests, but at the same time, you put a lot of effort into making a show. So you want to keep that up.
I will admit I'm one of those people who definitely started using the podcast guest disclaimer form. Not that I've ever had a problem with it, but it's one of those places, and this is true of many facets of the law, where it's not a problem until it is. And something I've always said to my kids to an annoying level, and if you ask them, they'll repeat it back to you with kind of that groan, snarky tone, right? It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And I imagine that is a cornerstone of a lot of what you do.
It's also, I agree 100%, but I also think that when you present your face to the guest or whoever as a business, hey, I'm serious about this. There's this thing I need you to look at and sign or click the box or whatever it is. Now they take it seriously too. And they will remember, maybe among those people who've never been a problem, someone once got a little irritated and started thinking, I should get them to take it. But I signed that thing. So you never heard anything more about it. Mission accomplished.
Yeah, that's the lucky way to go. One place that I'm sure you've been discussing a lot, we've only kind of, dipped around the edges a little bit, but I'm curious what you're seeing. What's happening with AI and podcasting? More so on the folks who are using AI to completely generate or create their content. What are some pitfalls that they're going to need to be watching out for? What are some things on the horizon that you think are coming down the pipeline for them?
Great question. And it is definitely the hot topic these days. The AI is a bit of a double-edged sword. It's a great tool. It's very useful, very helpful. In order to do that, of course, it has had to go out and slurp up a lot of content from the internet, and that all the AI companies are being sued over this ingestion and training based on existing copyrighted works. And these lawsuits are mostly just in the beginning stages. One of them recently came down in a verdict that said, not a verdict, a court ruling that said what the AI company had done ingesting this particular content was not fair use. So that means it is copyright infringement. And now we move on to how much they have to pay, that phase. So that's one side of it. But the other side, the creator side, is we use these tools somewhat at our peril because they don't always get it right. So if you use the AI to write a script about a particular topic, it could be filled with some errors, and the mistakes can be troublesome, especially if you're talking about there was a situation where someone used an AI to write an article about a person, and the AI kind of assumed a different person was the person we were talking about. And that person had a criminal record, and the person we were really talking about didn't, and it became a whole defamation thing. The publisher of the show who put that out was in the crosshairs of a lawsuit over false information that hurt this person's reputation. So that's a peril. Another side of this is that the Copyright Office has generally held that material that's generated by artificial intelligence isn't entitled to copyright protection. So if you're using it to craft the whole episode, you're not going to be able to claim ownership of that episode and prevent other people from copying it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and the theory is that copyright is about protecting human authorship. So no human author, and this is true of photographs that have been taken by. There was a monkey selfie case a number of years ago. There was a case involving an elephant that painted using a paintbrush it held in its trunk, and again, the Copyright Office has consistently said, no, those don't get copyright. They're not protected. Now, just recently, like in the last week or two, there was a case where the Copyright Office did grant copyright to an AI-generated work because the author had done so much additional prompting to craft the work to be just what he wanted. And the work is called A Single Slice of American Cheese, or it's just a visual artwork. But if you want to go look it up, it's actually kind of a fun thing to look at. But that's a very specific use case with a very deliberate effort to prove what could be done. So
interesting. So I want to go back real quickly to, right, we've talked a lot about, as far as how you can protect yourself from stealing other people's content, taking music, taking show titles. But right, as an indie podcaster, we don't really contemplate too much about protecting our own work, our own craft. Are there situations, or have you seen a situation where some big network or big show starts to dabble with an independent podcaster's material and that podcaster had some sort of recourse that they should take?
Well, there have been cases where podcast actually networks have ended up carrying a podcast that wasn't supposed to be on that network. I'm not going to name names, but and it was pretty easy to get it removed from the network. They don't want the trouble, and they'll just take it down. There's this mechanism, the DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act, that allows for takedowns when there's infringing work. The owner of that work can just notify the hosting company or the network or whatever and say, hey, that's infringing my stuff, take it down. You have to follow a particular procedure and form for sending that notice, but then the company, in order to avoid being sued itself, will take it down right away and just basically say, okay, if you think that's still valid and should be up there, you guys go fight it out and let us know. And that's, we've all seen a YouTube video that we were linked to that wasn't there anymore or something like that. That's the DMCA takedown. So it's actually a relatively, painless and easy process to get material taken down in this day and age of the web. Now, if there's been a lot of profit generated from it, there may be a reason to actually go and sue the infringers and things like that. But it does happen. Fortunately, or maybe it's unfortunate. Podcasts aren't necessarily a ripe target for this kind of stuff. I guess there are some shows that have such a big audience that they're, people want to use their stuff. I could imagine clips of some of those top shows out there being repurposed and rebroadcast and things like that. And in fact, I was just telling you before we started, there's a recent case in the Copyright Claims Board involving a podcast that was doing a critique of this particular online influencer and her lawyer who were going after people. And of course, when they used a clip from that influencer's content and that lawyer's content, they then sued the podcast, and the podcasters just won last week, a finding that what they were doing was fair use. And that's that defense to copyright infringement that's meant for education and criticism and commentary kinds of material. So there is a way.
And I guess that does lead to the other big issue, which is, right, if you are using somebody else's stuff, right, you're using a song, you're using clips, whatever it is, typically what is it going to look like as the podcaster? What are you going to experience? Is it going to be, are you going to get subpoenaed to a lawsuit? Are you just going to get a takedown? Are you just getting an email? Like, what is the evolution of trouble going to look like for you?
Well, there are some law firms out there that have made a business of going after folks that infringe on these sort of smallish scales. And, they come at you with a threat of what I would call a nuisance lawsuit. Pay us a few $100 or a few $1,000 and we won't sue you. And, it's easier to pay it than it is to fight it. So you might see that. Most often it's going to be that DMCA takedown. And, at best, it's an embarrassment if your show goes live on Monday and it's down on Tuesday or Wednesday or even months later. That episode missing from your feed kind of leaves a gaping hole, at least in some shows. So that embarrassment, and if you then push to get it put back up because you think it was legal, then you get into these claims in the Copyright Claims Board or going to full-grown federal court over these kinds of things. It does happen, but fortunately, not that often.
Gotcha. And I guess the big thing here is that even if you are, I don't want to say even if you're in the right, but typically, no matter what, this experience is going to be painful for you, even if you're right. Is that true? Like if you're facing takedown notices, if somebody is claiming you're using their property incorrectly, or, a lot of people like to say, but it's fair use, right? Like fair use, maybe, but it's still going to be painful.
Yeah. Yeah. So, painful. Yeah. I mean, tell me, choose your pain, I guess. Having your episode taken down and just living with it is a kind of pain. And it's sort of that embarrassment I was talking about. Fighting it is a painful process. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of back and forth and hiring people like me to help you and represent you in these cases. And, I mean, I've never met anybody who's been a party in a lawsuit who was enjoying the process. Fair use is an interesting thing because it is a defense in copyright infringement. So if you have to say, but it's fair use, chances are someone's already threatening or suing you. And, that's just, by then you're experiencing some of that pain already. And I would caution against it. If what you're doing is real criticism, like movie criticism or music criticism or teaching, real education kinds of stuff, then maybe there's an argument that fair use is the way to go with what you're doing. I would say, invest in a short consultation with someone like me to make sure you're on the right path.
All right. That is very fair. And yeah, again, it's, the question you have to ask yourself is if you want to use that piece of music in your episode, and you believe that you have this fair use defense, will the cost of hiring lawyers, going to courts, dealing with all this stuff, at the end of the day, did it improve your show by that much? Right? Like, was this battle worth it? Was your content so much better because you included that little music clip, or is it really just a giant headache for you?
I would say 9 out of 10 times it's not worth it. It's a big headache or a big expense one way or the other. And it's better just to, avoid, take the path of least resistance and avoid using the thing. If you are doing something where you have to use a clip of the music to talk about the fact that the artist did this and was exposed to that, what a great or what a terrible person the artist is, those kinds of things, the newsier the better, I guess. And there are some situations where I'd say go ahead, and some shows where it's their method of doing things. So I think they've done their legwork and figured out how to carve out those niches and do it right.
As a reminder, we are chatting with Gordon Firemark. He is the podcast lawyer. You can get more about him at gordonfiremark.com. You can also check out his Easy Legal for Podcasters program and his podcast law forms. Great resources for those of you who are looking for ways to protect your shows, you protect your properties without having to go, too crazy on spending money for legal defenses and legal assistance. Gordon has been doing this for many, many years. I've known many, many, many podcasters who have taken advantage of his resources, present company included, and those who have worked with him, and you're getting a great product and a great service. So cannot encourage you to check him out enough. Gordon, before we let you go, we have questions we'd like to ask every podcaster. The first one is there a place in podcasting in general where you'd like to see improvement from distribution, production, creation, even from consumption? Something about podcasts we were just like, God, I wish we did this better.
Well, I think discoverability is the big gap in podcasting. It's just, if I listen to a show that is about a particular topic or that has a particular host, I probably would like to hear other shows about it. And, as an example of folks that are doing it really well, YouTube and their algorithm is brilliant at this. And we can get into the debate of whether what YouTube is calling podcasting is podcasting, but they're doing a good job of feeding you more stuff that they think you're going to like. And the podcast community, the mechanism isn't there. I think that's something that could be developed. I don't know, maybe it's more like a Goodreads where you self-curate by explaining what you like and what you don't like about that. I know there's options. That's one. And the other area would be monetization with micropayments or crypto or something. And I know there are some folks working on it. I think that needs to be built out bigger and better and frankly just easier to do for both consumers and creators.
Couldn't agree with you more there. What about, is there any tech on your wish list, whether something that's out there that you just haven't bought yourself or something that you're like, God, somebody needs to make this piece of hardware or software that would make my podcasting life a lot easier?
I haven't identified a major, I mean, I've spent a lot of money on a studio and equipment, and I'm using a good microphone. I wish I had the Shure SM7, but I'm pretty happy with my Heil PR40 here. Beyond that, no. I mean, I'm sure there are things that would make it easier for those less technically inclined to create a podcast quickly and easily, and maybe even publish it. I think some kind of maybe a back-end software that would take a live stream and automatically convert it and turn it into a podcast episode or something like that. But I think most of the tools are getting pretty good. The AI editing assists are getting, I know for podcast editors, they don't like to hear that part, but they're getting pretty good at identifying the stuff that needs to go. So,
well, and as someone who's been in the space since, 2000s, it's certainly gotten a lot better since we first started.
Right.
And lastly, are there any podcasts on your playlist that are must listen tos, whether new episode comes out, you're going to stop and check it out, or you're not going to let that episode go by without checking it out?
I listen to a lot of business podcasts and marketing oriented stuff. I'm not a big entertainment content consumer. So most of what I listen to is, about how to do better in business, how to get more clients, get more traction with things and so on. So one of my favorites is a guy named Colin Boyd, who is a coach and teacher of public speaking and speaking to sell, basically. And his show is called The Expert Edge with Colin Boyd. He's an Australian gentleman, a client and a friend as well. And his show is must have weekly listening. I also like Amy Porterfield's Online Marketing Made Easy show, although I just heard she's changing it up and calling it the Amy Porterfield Show starting in March. So,
oh, wonder if she got hit with a trademark.
I doubt it. I think she's just pivoting the focus of things a bit.
You are probably correct. Once again, we have been chatting with the incredible Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. You can learn more about him and all of his services at gordonfiremark.com, including the Easy Legal for Podcasters program, his podcast law forms, and yes, he's a podcaster. Check out the Legit Podcast Pro podcast for some quick 2-minute, 3-minute tips every week from this wonderful gentleman, Gordon. It's great to see you. Great to chat with you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's been great being here. Appreciate it.